Hello and welcome once again to the Hulegaard Books podcast. As always, I am your humble host, David Hulegaard. One of the advantages to having successful friends is that you can occasionally pull the pity card and ask them to be special guests on your podcast. This week, I'm delighted to be joined by Hilary Heskett Shapiro and Miellyn Fitzwater Barrows, both of which are extremely versatile and whose talents stretch across multiple facets of their lives. In addition to working with these ladies on a professional level, I am also fortunate enough to sharpen my skills and learn from them in our writing group. If Noble New World Order captures the minds of readers upon its release later this year, it will be due in no small part to the feedback I received from Miellyn and Hilary during its creation. What have Miellyn and Hilary learned from the experience working in our writing group? What feedback would they pass along to aspiring writers? What successes and challenges have helped them to get to where they are today? All this and more in episode 9 of the Hulegaard Books podcast.
I normally start off these podcasts with introductions and all this kind of stuff, but I know you guys, it's a lot different doing these with friends, so you don't have to have all the same formalities. But for the people who don't know who you are, I thought it would be appropriate to start off with some introductions of who you are and what you do in the writing field. Of course, you don't have to get into everything granular like I do. I'll tell you my life story. We've got time. But so
the first time I watched Gone with the Wind. No, I'm kidding.
Exactly. Well, Hilary, let's go ahead and start with you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Hilary Heskett Shapiro. I am a writer. I write things that I like. No, but I've been published in Chicken Soup for the Soul, which is a best-selling series on all things that make your heart happy. And I've been in 3 editions of those, and I've been published in a couple trade publications on the subjects of marketing and super fun research. And I'm a huge gamer who now works at EA on BioWare's Dragon Age Inquisition. Yay, as a product manager.
Yay.
That was the worst intro ever.
Oh, stop. You haven't heard mine yet. Well, in addition to Hilary, and Hilary, thank you and welcome to the Hulegaard Books podcast. We've also got Miellyn with us.
I'm Miellyn Fitzwater Barrows. I'm a freelance writer and producer. I write games, television, screen, stage, and prose. And my work has appeared on more than a dozen television networks in anthologies such as Random House and Smart Pop Books anthologies and across the web. And I also wrote a video game called Strange Love's Vampire Boyfriends. It's a comedy, romance, choose your own adventure style app. So yeah, I do a lot of writing.
Well,
she writes the words.
She does. She does indeed. I'm excited to have you both on the podcast because we talk all the time, but never in any kind of capacity where other people can hear us. And everything we say is gold. So I thought, what better way to bring it to the world than through a podcast? So I actually did have an agenda of sorts because we talk about so many cool things when we're on our own individual sessions that are non-podcasted. But I wanted to talk about some things that have been on my mind and hopefully on yours as well. And if not, then surprise. But before we dig into some of these deeper topics, I wanted to start a little bit more, at the base level and just get to know you both a little bit better as writers. And we're going to do this panel style. So Miellyn, I'm going to start with you and I'm going to ask you, when did you know that you wanted to be a writer?
Oh, I was very young. So it was sometime after I wanted to be the world's first ballet dancing detective and a little bit before I discovered Egyptology, but I've really always been very interested in writing. My mother's a novelist. Her name is Judy Fitzwater. She has a whole bunch of books out. So I grew up around it. And I was the bookish kid. I always had a book in my hand. I'd fall asleep with books in my bed, which my dad would always get mad at me because I would destroy anything he loaned to me. But yeah, I was always writing stuff down. I think I started my first novel when I was in second or third grade. It was a mystery. It was very obvious. I probably got 5 pages done and thought it was an opus. So yeah, I couldn't tell you exactly when, but very young.
So Hilary, same question to you. When did you know that you wanted to be a writer?
That's a really interesting question because it's something that I struggle with even today. I consider myself a writer because I like writing, but yeah, I mean, I think every person goes through moments where they're like, I'm not really a writer. I'm just some jerk who thinks that they can write. You know what I mean? So it's a hard struggle. Man, you're really looking into my soul on this answer. So I think my earliest kind of acknowledgement of the fact that I like to put words together, probably sometime in 7th grade, maybe. I had to write a lot of essays and stuff in school, and I really liked English as a subject. So I had a teacher that was basically like, you are really good at putting this stuff together. This 5-paragraph essay is amazing. So you should really consider writing. And that kind of triggered like, oh, maybe I am good at this. Like, oh, maybe I should give this a try. So I think that was when I really clicked into trying to learn more about the art of writing. And then throughout the years, the many, many years since that time, many, many, many years, I've tried to just refine and figure out how to be a writer. And some days you have good days and some days you don't. So that's that.
Tell me about these good days. I'm still waiting to hear for those to come my way.
Yeah, it's tough. It's definitely a career path or a discipline. You have to be your own cheerleader, and it's really hard. I mean, and it's something that everyone feels like they can do because the barrier of entry is pretty low, because we all write emails, we all write notes to one another, and we're so surrounded by language that everyone kind of thinks that they're a writer, and maybe they are. So yeah, it's definitely one of those. I would consider a good day being a day that you can write something that's moving to you or to somebody else.
Awesome. Well, that is a fantastic answer, Hilary.
Oh, thank you so much. Words.
So, I'm going to open this question up to you guys, but I want to go first because I'm going to share a little story about me. But I'm always interested in hearing writers talk about their first stories, because it's said, through people I don't know, it is said that your first work always ends up on a shelf that no one ever reads besides yourself. And for me, that is absolutely true. But I want to tell you a little bit about my first story, and then I'm going to ask you guys about yours. So you could be thinking about that. I didn't know I necessarily wanted to be a writer, but I knew I wanted to create. And it started as a kid playing video games. And I know that sounds funny because most people had the assumption back in those days that video games, rotted your brain, not inspired creativity. But I would play Super Mario Brothers until my freaking hands bled, right? Like, you remember that annoying pain used to get in your thumb from playing on those damn 8-bit Nintendo pads? Yeah, well, I had
those
that like
square bricks. Yes.
Yeah, it was like a chronic condition. My thumb always hurt, but like I would play through Mario, and you'd get to the thank you Mario, but the princess is in another castle. I needed more than that. I needed more than just the princess was in another castle. Like, tell me how, or should I say, show me how this princess has moved on to another location. If she was once here, where did she go and who took her? And, eventually we get our answers. But these are the kind of things that were nagging me as I played. And before long, I started having these very detailed dreams. This is sad, but true. These very detailed dreams about a Mario Zelda crossover story that was kind of like an action RPG of sorts. And I swear to God, this was before the Super Mario RPG that came in the 16-bit era later on. But I started having these crazy visuals of like Mario and Link working together to, save Zelda or whatever. So I wrote that story, which sounds similar to Miellyn's like 5-page opus. But to me, goddammit, it was War and Peace. And that's all that matters. So anyway, kind of embarrassing. I hope to God it is burning in hell somewhere, but it existed at one point in time. So Miellyn, I would love to hear more about your mystery that you wrote.
Oh my God. I know that they found a scrap of fabric that matched some murderer's shirt. I don't even know. It was awful. It was awful. But, I think that where do you count what your first work was? Because I think everybody, as Hilary was talking about how the barrier to entry is so low and how everyone is taught writing and how we all write all the time and from the very beginning of school all the way through. So what do you count as your first piece? Is it your first piece that you wrote once you decided that that's something that you wanted to do? I wrote a couple of short stories in, I guess it was like high school, that I actually submitted to a contest and got an honorable mention in the contest for.
Oh, wow.
That to me was a place where I was really starting to write and starting to think this is something that I wanted to do. They were very literary, very wordy, very not the kind of thing that I write now. Now I write pop fiction. I went through a whole magic realism phase where all of my stories were so weird and very Gabriel Garcia Marquez kind of surreal pieces. And, I'd show them to my mom and she would say, well, the writing is really good. Don't really get what you're doing here, but the writing is really good. So I don't know if that's an answer or a non-answer, but that's what you're getting.
I think it works. So let's say for definition that the first story we ever created or first work is when you wrote something independently outside of a homework assignment or something like that. So in that case, I think that works out well. You're talking about submitting things for contests and stuff in high school. So Hilary, what about you? Like when did you start?
I think I'm strange in a sense that I think I could take my journaling as a story that I wrote outside of, homework or whatever. And the reason I say that is that while I was journaling, I was writing it from the perspective as someone reading my work. So instead of Dear Diary, I felt like crap today. Like not any of that stuff, but it was basically like every section had to have a beginning, middle, and end. There had to be an arc. And I knew to do this before I knew even what I was doing. Right. So it's like these journals tell a story and I would, obviously inflate certain things or add in certain, bits of color that actually didn't happen to me, but I thought it would be cool. So it was almost like I was writing a memoir of a fake person. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So yeah. And I even had things like dialogue, really strange things. So I think that was, and that will never, those things will never ever see the light of day. So I think that would be kind of like a story based on some, imagination of myself or something. And then of course, fan fiction is big. I wrote some fan fiction. Mm-hmm. So, yeah. And then, writing little short stories, those will never see the light of day as well. But yeah, I think that's probably when I started really writing and committing time to putting words on paper. And I think when you start being a writer, right? Mm-hmm. Is when you commit to it.
I would argue that your journal, the way you did your journals is probably the way most memoirs are written. I mean, I know there's been a lot of kerfuffle in the past couple of years of how true are these books that people are putting out, and where do you draw the line between a good story and what really happened?
Right. Yeah. Like the car chase never really happened to me, but it's in my journal. Just kidding.
Yeah, I'm feeling really insecure about my journal now because I literally just wrote, I'm having a crap day.
Dear Diary.
Hilary's describing this, and I'm like, God, she read my journal.
Yeah.
Kind of excited.
Yeah, the drug deal that went down. Yeah, that didn't actually happen.
Well, I have a similar process, right, where you kind of you're influenced by things, whether they're stories you hear or things that you do experience, and then you just embellish the crap out of them. And like that's how a lot of my short stories get created. And then, like my wife will read it and she'll be like, that's not how this happened. This is crazy. I'm like, oh, no. And it's totally the way it happened. You just were asleep. But, such is the life of a fiction writer. So let's talk a little bit about process, because everybody's kind of got a different way about how they approach writing their stories, whether they're short stories or full-length novels or journals, poems, whatnot. I'm curious what processes that you use to start your story. Like I, for example, when I'm writing short stories, I kind of work by the seat of my pants for a large degree of it. I start with a basic outline, but I really just kind of like to feel the flow and go with the story. And then when I'm writing, like a much bigger work, I have like detailed outlines and crazy things. So Hilary, I'll start with you. When you're writing, because I know you have one novel so far that you're working on and completed, but what kind of process did you use to get that going?
I started off thinking that an outline was going to save my life, and I'm pretty methodical about how I get things, how I approach problems, and I'm really big on processes, which is really boring. First, I started off with the characters, and then I said, I took like magazines and I cut out pictures of people that I thought could look like these characters. I created character sheets on all of them, like what are they like, what are they not like, how are they motivated, what do they carry in their pocket, like things as small as that. And then I decided I was going to make a story based on these characters, and then that was a while ago. The story has changed completely, but it was a good way to kick off exactly what I wanted to do. And then I thought how to open the novel. I wrote it straight through, so I started with chapter 1 and then finished at chapter 20 whatever. I knew things like you need to start off with a hook, that you need to have something exciting happen right off the bat, and you have to get right into the action right away, because that's the type of book I'm writing. That's how I started. But I mean, I guess my process is I think about the characters in the scene, I write the dialogue first, and then I back up and write all the action, and then I back up, I write all the sensory, and then I back up, and then I write all the fluffy stuff that ties things together and tries to make the setting emotional, that kind of stuff. I follow this process no matter what. I can't get away from it, and it seems to help me.
See, isn't that interesting? Because I remember the first time you told me that, Hilary, that's how you write. And I thought, wow, it never even occurred to me to approach a scene that way.
Mm-hmm.
I write a scene front to back. I start at the beginning of the scene and I let them talk it all out, but I also put in the action as I go. I think that's fascinating. I think it makes a ton of sense. It's just so different from how I think about it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Well, and it gets difficult too, and because there are scenes that obviously don't have dialogue, or you're writing something, or especially if you're writing from first person point of view, there are points of exposition which I'm not huge on, just because I feel like exposition can really weigh a story down. It's basically take out the dialogue but still keep the same process. So I'm really strange in that way. I don't know where I learned to do that. It just is something that works for me. Don't recommend doing it if it's not your thing. I'm going to try to do it that way if that's not your thing. Yeah.
Well, and Miellyn, to you, I would ask the same question, but Hilary actually brought something up that I didn't think about. It's a really interesting part, and that's kind of developing your characters before kind of launching into the story arc. So Miellyn, I know you're working on a book right now as well. So what process are you following that's maybe similar to Hilary or different from Hilary?
Everything I write, I have a completely different approach to. And it's such a different process for me to write something that's completely mine, like the novel that I'm working on, as opposed to things that I'm commissioned to do, which usually have a creative brief and they have information behind them already, or I'm working with existing materials. With this, it's a lot harder because I come up with it all by myself. Well, obviously not by myself, as you two know, because I'm always bothering you. What do you think of this idea? Does this make sense? But I don't really outline. Well, actually, that's not true. For the novel I'm working on right now, I did outline it, and then I don't know. I was probably only 30 pages in when I abandoned that. So I had an idea. I mean, I start with concept. I want to write a werewolf romance, and this one started with the title that I won't share with you because it may not be the title once we're done with it. I sort of start putting scenes together and start writing and kind of let the characters tell me what they want to do, which sounds a little nuts. But the more I write, the more I get to know the characters, the more I get to know the idea that I want to portray. So then I can go back and revise. So I have about half of my novel right now, and I've actually done a complete rewrite of the first half, which is a big no. Don't do it. Keep writing to the end, guys. It's actually helped me a lot because through our work together, the three of us together, I learned that I needed to kind of juice up certain parts of the story, and I decided I wanted to do that before I got any further. I don't know. My creative process is very messy. It is not pretty. But it's what I know how to do. And I think that's something that struck me when Hilary was talking. She's like, don't do this unless you have to. I think that most of us have to go off of instinct at some point, and you kind of write however it works for you. You can try to do this methodically, and you can try to do this in a certain way, but really it's however the ideas come to you is how you have to work with them.
Mm-hmm.
Totally.
Yeah. I agree with that 100%, and that's actually a really good segue to the next thing I wanted to talk to you about, which is kind of shaping characters. Because, as we've talked about, like even just coming up with your main story idea is a different process. We've got 3 people on this podcast, and we've each got a different process, and I'm sure that developing characters is also going to be a different process. And what I'm about to say is going to make me sound like the worst writer in the world, but it is what it is. When I'm developing characters, I don't always know them as well as I would like to going into a story, right? Because for me, it's fleshing out the story first. Like that's kind of how I have to approach writing. But I get to know my characters as I go. So I can say, well, Johnny so-and-so is my character, and he is. So don't you dare steal that. Johnny so-and-so is starring in my next novel. But I know who my character is going to be, and I may have some like very basic things about this character that I know. but I kind of flesh out their personality as I go. Like I might say, as this character interacts with the world, maybe like other little traits start to develop, like, dumb stuff, right? Like a fear of stepping on cracks in the pavement, or, an aversion to this particular hamburger place, like whatever, right? Like I come up with these little things on the fly. They just kind of happen. It's like what Miellyn was saying about your characters really dictate how they want to be portrayed in this book.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wanted to talk to you guys about that and kind of get an idea of what it's like for you. Like when you're shaping your characters, how detailed do you go? Like, Hilary was saying earlier about as detailed as what's in their pocket. So Miellyn, what about you? Let's start with you. What's that process like when you're creating characters?
Well, I think it's different with different characters. I love to put someone in a situation and see how they're going to react.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times, even when we learn about other people who are real people, you see someone react to a situation and you learn something about them, right? So you put that person in a situation, that character in a situation, and then you really think about what would happen, or they just kind of tell you, you have this idea, and then you work with it. So I don't go in with a fully fleshed out character, because for me, it's a lot about the character, but it's a lot about the story. And a lot of times my characters are normal people who are challenged to something bigger. I don't know. It's so situational. It's hard to sit down and analyze it. I really just sit down with the page and say, okay, this is what's going to happen next. That person does this. Well, how does that make me feel? How would that make that character feel? And I go from there. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think for me it gets really hard because I think I might be a sociopath. No, just kidding. Just because whenever something happens, there's a moment, and I totally believe, and this may not be true for everyone else, but there's a moment when anything happens in your life where you can choose to react a certain way, right? So here I go again with all the being methodical. So if something bad happens or good happens, I can choose to go one direction or the other. I can be happy, I can be sad, whatever. So that makes it hard for me to use characters to base off of me, just because would I have chosen to be happy in this moment, or would I have chosen to be not so happy in this moment? So I think that's why I start off with a character grid or a character chart or whatever, and make sure that I have their motivations completely nailed down. Like, this person is motivated by this, and this is how they're going to achieve their goal. And knowing that any scene that I put them in, and yeah, things happen on the fly. I mean, I'm not so plotted out that I know exactly what's going to happen. And I love that feeling where you get to let go and just start writing. But I know these characters will want to accomplish X because their whole person is driving toward a particular goal.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So yes, I do let them have a little bit of freedom, but I find that the scenes that I cut the most are the ones where I've just let go. And when I go back to knowing in following those rules that I set up in the beginning, those are the scenes that generally are the ones that seem to have the most impact, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
I think that makes sense. And I think, too, you made me think of something, how a lot of times, though, we're writing about people who can't choose how they feel about something, or I am anyway. Your situations are so heightened that you just react, or they just react.
Mm-hmm.
And figuring out how a character would just react to something is interesting. Mm-hmm. That you can sit down and choose how they would react, but that they don't have the choice.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, and then, hopefully too, when you're developing characters, and everybody wants to read a book about people who react, I think that if you had every character like analyzing situations and delaying their response, that would be a pretty boring book, right? Mm-hmm. So I think a lot of times characters are caricatures more,
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Just mm-hmm. because they're a little bit more extreme. And to be fair, situations are more extreme at least in our books than everyday life. So mm-hmm. you're not going to write a story about how I commuted to work today. You know what I mean? So it's
well, not now.
Except if there was like a tanker spill and nuclear bombs. Yeah, something like that. No, but it's always this like extreme side of, these people are a little bit more extreme than normal everyday people, or the situation is entirely, out there with maybe some paranormal elements or some really cool like magic elements. Who knows? Could be, right? Anything's possible in a book.
Absolutely. And it's like that old William Goldman quote where this is the good parts version.
Exactly.
You're just going to tell the good parts, And I think that I struggle with that because I think about all the stuff happening in between. I mean, how did they get from this one location to the other location? Is that important? Does it matter? If nothing happened on the bus, do you put them on the bus? And you don't, but you also can't leave out too much because you want to make sure it feels natural. So I find it interesting to watch the way that they do that in films and television because it's a little easier to look at it visually and think about how, okay, we cut from scene to scene and there's a lot left out, and how we can do that as well. If we make our stories a little more cinematic, we can kind of just bring together the most interesting pieces. It makes me think about reality TV and how it's not real. If reality TV were really, truly real, it would be the most boring thing ever. It's like, let's have a show about my barber shop and people come in and get their hair cut.
That's the way I always envisioned myself on The Real World. Like when I was in high school and I would watch, like the first season of The Real World where they were in New York. Mm-hmm. And I was thinking like, man, I would love to be on this show because I would just be the one like sitting around in their room doing nothing. And they'd be like, let's check in with Dave. Oh, he's doing nothing. And back to Becky. So, no, I know exactly what you mean. One of the challenges that I encountered early when I decided that this is what I wanted to do, I wanted to write and tell stories, was really finding the confidence to be comfortable with the voice that I'd established as a writer. And
that's good.
I think one of the biggest challenges is for people that are new or, kind of starting out, dipping their toe in the water, so to speak, is that there's so many rules, right? Like there's obviously grammar rules. Like these are things that we should all know and hopefully have learned over the years. But there's also kind of these, I don't want to call them trends because they probably have always been, English rules or grammar rules. But it can be confusing for somebody who's coming into this, who's just really excited to tell a story. And then there's like all these contradictions of like what you should and shouldn't do. I'm curious, like if you guys encountered this when you started writing stories, if you're still encountering it, because I know I am, and kind of what that's been like for you. Like, do you stick to the rules or the things that are dictated to you, or do you find that you are confident in your ability to just tell the story with the voice that you want and deviate from that path? And Miellyn, I'm going to start with you on this one.
I'm pretty confident in my voice because I've been writing for so long and I'm just comfortable. It's just the way that I write. But rules do trip you up. The no ly word rule that I just learned like a couple of years ago. That one really trips me. It really trips me up. It's one of those things where you want to make sure that your work is as beautiful and as well rendered as possible. I think you have to save that for the revisions, if you can. I think you get it down on paper and then you go back and make it beautiful. Because if you're thinking the whole time when you're writing the story down about, oh, I don't know if the comma goes there, you're never going to get it finished.
Mm-hmm. No, that's very true. And the reason why I wanted to start with you on this topic was because when I first read your work, one of the things that you said to me that really stuck out, like that really resonated with me, was that you were saying like, look, I'm very confident in the voice of this story because I want the reader to feel like I'm sitting right next to them on the couch reading this story. And I thought that was so cool because, like I said, confidence is something that we all can struggle with at times. And I really liked your approach. That's like, you know what? This is what I want to do. This is the way I want my writing perceived. And I just thought that was really cool. So I wanted to get a chance to, get your thoughts on that because, again, like, and I'll get into this a little bit later, but I get so sick and tired of fighting with people, who are telling me like, no, you can't do this because this is what you have to do. This is the gold standard. And I'm kind of like, F that, because that's not the way my story is going to work.
Well, I think about Faulkner.
Mm-hmm.
I think about Faulkner a lot, actually, which is another issue that I may have. He did not care. He was like, I'm going to write this however I want to write this, and everybody's going to deal with it. And he was I don't know how successful he was in his life. I mean, he's obviously held up as an icon now. He broke all the rules. And I remember this conversation you were referring to, and I think I also said to you, I know I break rules, and I'm okay with it. Mm-hmm. And I use sentence fragments, and I start sentences with but and trail off with ellipses, and that's on purpose. I think when people get too far down into the mechanics of writing for fiction, in particular pop fiction, they're missing the point. I think there are as many ways to write as there are people who write. Yes, you want your grammar to be correct. You want your descriptions to be good. You want your punctuation to be right. But if you know how to use those things, you can also misuse them.
Mm-hmm.
It's a little small-minded to say there's only one way to write a story.
Mm-hmm. I mean, at the end of the day, like, isn't our goal as a storyteller to be entertaining, right? I mean,
absolutely.
That's the way I kind of see it. And Hilary, I'm going to shift this conversation on to you now, because you have a style that is very, very detailed. And, you know, going into your work, like, I had obviously read things that you had written for Chicken Soup for the Soul, which is a completely different style. But
Mm-hmm.
like, going into your novel, like, you have this very, very descriptive style. And I was wondering, like, did that just come to you naturally, or?
No, I kind of think that's part of Autumn, the character in my book. I think, you know, because I'm writing it from first person, I had to change the way that I would say things to fit more how she would. And of course there's some bleeding over that happens. But no, it's just something that I did. And I can't really, I mean, I'm glad that it stuck out for you, because I think, you know, it's definitely something that I use that technique a lot. It's just how I framed it within this book is different. Obviously I can't do that in Chicken Soup because I'm getting commissioned to write X amount of words, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you can't really do that so much. But when you have a slower pace in a novel, you can definitely spend some time there. And everything that I write in terms of setting is just as important as everything else that's happening in that scene. I think a lot of writers write setting and they're like, cool, the setting is set. Now to put the good stuff in, the tension, the drama, the emotion. I don't think that setting needs to stand away from that. I think there can be just as much drama in a setting as any other thing that's happening. So I forgot your question already. So did I learn that? No, I think I just thought about it. And I think Miellyn hit it on the head a little while ago when she was talking about watching things like TV or movies to get inspired to write. A lot of movies that I've seen take that approach where they zoom in on a drop of water on a leaf and then they pan out and you see this beautiful world. It's you know, it's like you're walking through a tunnel and then you're so confined, and then all of a sudden you open up to this big wide world and it's like, whoa, you know?
Yeah.
That's a bad example. Yes, I'm a writer. Like, whoa. How's that roll for you?
But I think it's interesting because I think that the world would be a very boring place if every book had the exact same voice. And I think, like, that's where I tend to rebel a little bit when I get people that you know, and to be fair, people that are probably a bit more educated than I am, that certainly understand rules of writing a bit more than I do, and that's okay. I'm comfortable where I'm at. But I'm at a point where if you all stick to these rules and we're all trying to tell our stories through, like, those binoculars, right? Like, it's just going to be a really boring place to find a book because you're not going to find any personality, right? And my style in particular, as I'm sure as you both know, I'm very dialogue heavy, and that's something that can get frowned upon by people that are better writers than me. That they're much more into, you know, telling their stories through narrative and using dialogue sparingly. I fell in love with Kevin Smith, like, in the 90s, right? Like, I know
So did I.
he's a filmmaker, but his style just transcended film, right? Like, he had this way of telling a story through such detailed dialogue, and I loved that. And I saw a really bad review for Chasing Amy, which is one of my favorite movies. And this review was basically just bashing Kevin Smith for being too talky, which I thought was fascinating. So anyway, bringing this to a point, I swear, when I started writing stories, I found that I was going back to a lot of that influence. And it's like, I don't want to tell a story that's obviously all dialogue. Like, there certainly needs to be, you know, something to set the scene and whatnot. But I love letting rich characters and characters that you care about kind of dictate the pace of what's happening and tell you what's happening.
I think you have to be careful, though, too, just because if you want to start a story in a dialogue-heavy way, a lot of times it's almost like, will the reader care?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So I think there's a balance there. Like I'm totally with you. You've read my work. I love dialogue. I love me some dialogue. But if you're not hooked onto the character yet, you may not care what they have to say.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So there's a balancing act that you have to do, at least in the beginning, especially in the front end of a novel.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
No, absolutely.
Yes, I think that you have to worry about your readers caring, but I think too, if you have somebody who says interesting things, you could still hook them in. You said something, David, that made me stop when you said better writers than you, and I think that this is such a hard thing to gauge. How do you compare writers?
Mm-hmm.
People's perception of writing and what is good writing, everybody has a different feeling and everybody has a different opinion, and I'm not sure that it matters. If you find an audience and your audience is entertained with your work, you're doing great. And I think it's very interesting that people try to compare, who's better, who's worse, whatever. Everybody has a different taste for story and for how stories are told. And that's part of what's so great about it. I mean, I think one of the reasons that I write is that I have the audacity to believe that other people think the way that I do and that they want to hear stories that I have to tell. Mm-hmm. And when I put my game out, it was interesting because it's the first thing that I really had put out there that got reviews. A lot of my work's been on television and people don't talk about you on the internet the same way. And some people think I'm brilliant and some people think I'm a talentless hack, and that's okay. I think if you're writing for the common denominator, I think if you're writing for everyone to love you, it's just going to be not very good. It's going to be bland. It's going to be too common.
No, I definitely agree with that. And I guess like as a reader, what I'm looking for is something that I can really sink my teeth into. And, I've got a buddy of mine, William Vitka, that writes in a style that just fascinates me. And I recommend picking up any of his books because they're all like his voice. And he just has this way of integrating his personality into the narrative that he tells stories in ways that just kind of speak to me. I don't even know what it is. Like he's very pulpy in a modern day setting, and he uses a lot of colorful language. They're books that just kind of resonate with me. And I wouldn't say that somebody's ever going to compare him to like Hemingway, right? Like, but I just really like the way he writes, and I'm very entertained. So yeah, like I totally agree with what you're saying about that. It's all subjective, right? Like there's writers like is it John Locke that sells like a million copies of his ebooks on Amazon, and there are people that just bash him left and right, for just writing a bunch of dialogue. But again, it's like, is that because do people say these things because they really believe he's not a very good writer, or do they say these things because their books aren't selling a million copies on Amazon?
Yes, for both.
I think it's the latter. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But I think some people don't. Not everybody is going to like every piece of writing.
Mm-hmm.
You may not like somebody's prose, but you love their stories and they're a bestseller. It's yes, there's a lot of jealousy and a lot of backbiting when you become that successful. But I also think that, not everybody probably likes his work either.
Yeah, I'd say that's fair.
But I think if you're so compelled after buying a book like that to say some nasty things online, I feel like there's a lot more motivating that than just I didn't like the story.
I think that's true. I will say my mom has like one or two people who really hate her work, and they read every single one of her books and get on there and write bad reviews. And so
at least they bought the book.
Right.
Yeah. Why did you buy every single book and read it and then write a bad review? Like, don't read my work if you don't like it. That's what she says, But then
Right.
she has
Totally.
other people who love her. So what is that motivation? I don't know. And I think, and that's something that I think we've all talked about before, is that people also, when they write reviews and they talk about people's work publicly, they don't think about the fact that there's a person on the other side of that there's a human that they are trying to bring down, that that the person seems not real to them in some way because it's someone who wrote a book. It's on the internet. It's you're insulated from that person. You don't have to look them in the face and say, I hate your writing. I hate your prose.
Yeah, I mean, but the reverse is true though too. I mean, even from the chicken soup stuff, which is more I'm putting air quotes around this, touching, like it's meant, there is something called a chicken soup moment, and I'm not making that up, with every story that's in those books. So there's a real element to those, because they are nonfiction. Everything that I wrote in those books actually is true. I mean, it's nonfiction. So you're getting a glimpse into my life from perspective that I was at the time. So, I've gotten such nice emails from people, or, through my website or whatever else, of people saying, yeah, that happened to me, or, your story touched me because, I was going through this rough time, or, this advice is really great, or yes, I can totally understand this. So I think that there's a trade-off. There's good and bad in everything. And, hopefully one day I'll have the opportunity to have people completely lambaste my work because I'm so successful. I'm totally okay with that. Go for it. Write me hate mail. I don't care. But yeah, there are those, I think, for those same writers that get all that hate online, they are getting the good stuff too. And when you put a story out there, you are touching people's lives. You have their attention for a few hours. And that's in today's day and age, that's pretty like monumental. If I can have someone like read a story of mine and I'm actually talking to them through my story, that's pretty awesome.
You have to remember that's happening too, though, because that was the first thing I ever had published was an essay in a Random House book called 20-something essays by 20-something writers. And I wrote about myself because it was nonfiction. You were supposed to write about being in your 20s. I wrote about my boyfriend at the time, who's now my husband. And I got emails about the character, Sean. And, I was like, oh, wow, I better really think about what I'm putting out there and what I'm saying about myself through this stuff. It's a lot safer in fiction, although people still assume that you're writing about yourself in fiction. At least you can say it's fiction. I think it's hard to sit down and write something and not worry about people reading it while you're writing it, but then worry about people reading it before you put it out there.
Are we talking about sex scenes again?
Well, I wasn't actually, but we can. That's awkward. It is awkward, but you have to write the scene that works for your story, right? And then go back and make sure that you're not putting anything out there that you don't want to have out there forever and ever and ever, because you can't get it back. Once it's out there, it's gone. It's not yours anymore in so many ways. It's a piece of you. If you can divorce yourself from it being you, I think that's very tricky. I think about Stephanie Meyer a lot since I wrote a vampire game, and I get asked about her a lot. And if she took personally all of the negativity that she got about having written the Twilight books, I think she wouldn't be able to function.
That's true.
Because you get all the positive stuff, but for every positive comment, the negative comment weighs twice as much, right? It's like it's harder to brush that off. It's harder to not believe it. I was reading something the other day that was talking about just divorcing yourself from your product and letting it go.
Stephen King talks about that a lot.
Does he?
Yeah, he's probably one of my favorite books on writing is Stephen King's On Writing. And while there's a lot of things in there that you may or may not relate to, I think that one lesson is really, really good. What he does in his process is he writes a book, he puts it away for 6 months, and then he forgets about it, writes something else because he's obviously tremendously prolific, goes back after 6 months, takes that story back out, and then edits it at that point, because there you've been divorced from it for 6 months and you had some space. And then he's also talking about, when you write a screenplay and it, goes into the hands of somebody else who wants to create from your IP, you do have to kind of take a step back and realize that that story is now in their hands now. It's kind of an interesting look. I mean, obviously, Stephen King is tremendously successful, and hopefully we will all get there someday.
I'd be satisfied with half his success. I'd be really cool with just half.
Yeah. No, I'm with you. He's doing something right? So I hope that someday we get a little bit of that. So, yeah.
Well, I think one of the things that you guys brought up that resonates with me is, after publishing books, like you're so caught up in the moment before publishing a book, right? Or an ebook or whatever you do, because you're excited. Like you've spent all this time, all this blood, sweat, and tears to tell your story, and you want to get it out in front of people. But then the reality, once people start writing reviews and critiquing or praising, critiquing or praising, it kind of, the reality hits you where you're like, oh crap, did I remember to put my shields up for this? And a good example is, my first book is called Noble. I published it in October of 2010. So for a first work, like I look back and I'm definitely proud of the book that I wrote, but in 2014, is it the same book that I'd write today? No, definitely not. And as such, I can't go back and read it because there are things that irk me that I want to tinker and fix and whatever. But like the reviews that I get are generally very positive. I think I've had of like 21 reviews, like 18 have been 5-star. So I feel really proud about that.
Right.
But because of that, to a point that you said earlier, it's the little things, right? The little like biting comments or the little negative barbs that stick with you. Like for 18 5-star reviews, right? It's the 1 2-star that's just like, it keeps me up at night, wondering like, oh my God, I'm such a hack. What am I thinking? But I think that like something that's good for people to know is that you have to take feedback with a grain of salt, because if somebody rips your entire book to shreds, that's going to sting, right? It's going to more than sting. It's going to hurt. But like, if people just nitpick little stupid things, right? Like little decisions that you made because you felt like they were right for the story or they're right for your character. If people nitpick those decisions, that's just them saying, I would have done it differently. And in that case, who gives a shit, right? Like we all would do it differently if we were the ones, writing these stories.
Mm-hmm.
Like I love the world I've created with Noble. I mean, obviously, like it's my world. I'm going to love it. But I didn't want to tell the same hard-boiled detectives, noir story that has been done to death. Like I love that world and I love that style, but I didn't want to tell the same story. And so my protagonist in the series, or in the first couple books anyway, is just different. Like he's not bumbling, but he's not like, like Mickey Spillane quality, right? And somebody took the time to write me a bad review on Amazon to tell me that he was weak because his vice was apple pie. And I thought that was the most bizarre thing. Like, I wrote 90,000 words and created this, like, sci-fi noir universe. And out of all of that, out of those 90,000 words, you're upset that he likes apple pie.
Yeah, that's the thing, though. I mean, I think that everybody, what they say about opinions, right? But but I think that everybody's going to have those kinds of feedback. I got a really weird email on Facebook from a woman who read my game book. She told me that she was Mormon and that my characters drank way too much coffee, but that also there wasn't enough sex in my book, and that the guys were too hunky, that she liked them skinnier. Okay, fair enough. That's our tastes might be slightly different. That's okay,
Yeah.
But I don't know if that's necessarily feedback on my work.
Right.
More that I love the fact that she read my piece and thought enough about it to sit down and write me a letter about how people should not drink this much coffee. I think, well, yes, I think they should, but okay. And so it's funny. My mom got a letter one time from, I think it was a dentist who went through and talked about all the times that she describes people's teeth in one of her books. Everybody's going to have a different thing that they take away from your piece. And part of what we were talking about before about divorcing yourself from your work is that whole idea of you can't know or control how people will react or what they will connect with or dislike or like in your piece, in your work. It's very funny. Some people say you should never read any of that stuff. I tend to find it entertaining, but you have to have a real strong constitution.
Mm-hmm. No, it's very, very true. So, Hilary, this may be kind of a bizarre question, but I'm curious, like in talking about this, having thick skin and putting up shields and all that, like, do you ever encounter any of that, like with, like say, Chicken Soup for the Soul? Like, do you get all like praise and support for these very personal stories you're telling, or do you find that people will nitpick that too?
I can honestly say that I have not gotten any negative feedback as a result of Chicken Soup for the Soul. I think when people buy those books, there's a certain leniency that they have because not everybody in those in those books are professional writers.
Mm-hmm.
So it just happens. I mean, they do get a severe round of editing. I mean, it's legit. I mean, it's a true publisher, and they do a lot of great things to help people become better writers. Yeah, I think people are a little bit, they buy the books because they want a slice of life. They want that particular just brand of storytelling. They want something that's, maybe a little bit more raw, or maybe just a bit more nice than you'd pick up on the store shelf.
Mm-hmm.
So, I personally haven't gotten very, if any, negative feedback. I've gotten a lot of positive feedback. So that's really nice. It does make you feel good. That doesn't mean that I've never been assaulted with negative feedback for other things. So I think the same thing holds true. I mean, I'm a business person. I've owned a couple companies, and in those companies, you sell things and you don't sell things. And that's probably the most negative feedback you can get, is when you're not successful, but you learn. So books are like products, at least in my mind. I know that if my book that I'm working on right now doesn't sell, it won't stop me.
Mm-hmm. I have to say, though, it actually does make me feel better to know that people don't troll Chicken Soup for the Soul books.
I like that too.
That actually does make me feel a lot better.
I have hope for humanity.
Indeed. Well,
yes, but as a marketer, I mean, people troll my campaigns all the time.
I'm sure they do.
Not so much on the project I'm on right now, but the things in the past. Oh yeah.
Oh, just wait. Just wait.
Yeah, just wait.
It's coming.
Yeah.
So one of the topics, I've waited a long time to get here, but one of the topics I'm really excited to talk about with you guys is writing groups, because I think that for writers that of any level of experience, really, that a writing group is something that is probably like one of the most valuable tools in your toolbox. At least it's been that way for me. So I'd love to talk to you guys about it, because I've been in previous writing groups, but it wasn't until I connected with you two that I really felt like I was getting something meaningful out of the experience. And and so that's really like a big thing I wanted to cover with you guys. I feel so much more confident about the book I'm working on right now because of the feedback I've received from you two. That for me has not been my experience in writing groups. Typically my experience has been, there's like that one person that knows everything about everything ever, that you'll ask for feedback on your story, and they'll tell you why semicolon is your friend and why you didn't use it appropriately, and it's just a big waste of time. But
I'm sorry I have to break in, because I think I wrote you 2 paragraphs on commas one time.
completely different. Completely different. That's
Miellyn's a little bit obsessed with the comma.
I really am. It's like hyphens for Hilary.
But
I do love hyphens.
I will say you do that while also commenting on my story, right? Like
I do talk about your story, yes.
Yeah. In previous experience, all I get is like how my grammar sucks and like no feedback whatsoever on my story. I actually broke an editor, which is probably like my favorite moment ever as a writer, because nothing makes you feel better than knowing that you've made an editor like want to jump off a cliff. But like, things improve, hopefully. Speaking of this writing group, which has been extremely positive, and writing groups in general, like for you guys, and Hilary, we'll start with you. What are the advantages and disadvantages that you've found working in a writing group?
The negatives can be that, not so much with our writing group, but in writing groups in the past, you are contending with ego. And I remember being in a group that I learned a lot from. So even with the negative kind of egotistical, my art is better than yours kind of thing, I did learn. But one person said to me, "Oh, well, you're not going to be able to write a really compelling story until you're older than 40, because you don't know what life's about until after 40. So I was like, so you hate me because I'm younger than you? Yeah, you're dealing with people, right? So sometimes people have things going on in their own lives that you don't know about. So a lot of those insecurities that we all have sometimes are projected onto other people. So that's negative number one. And I'm going to end there. All the positives, even when someone doesn't like you and they're reading your work, they may give you that nugget of feedback that you just never thought of. And because you have more people with more experiences looking at your work, you're able to get a lot of interesting insights that you may or may not want to implement. But for our group, I think the positive thing is, we always give constructive feedback, and we're each other's cheerleaders. So, hug.
Hug. But, it's funny because for me, this writing group, in a way, started at Ruth's Chris in Seattle, where I met Miellyn for the first time and drunkenly told her my high concept for a book I hadn't even written yet. And to
Yes.
Miellyn's credit, she sat there with a smile on her face and just listened the whole time. And I thought, this is somebody that I absolutely want to work with. And this was way before the idea of the writing group came up. So I was like connected to Miellyn immediately. I'm like, she listened to my drunken rant about a freaking book that I may never write. And that was awesome. So Miellyn, same question to you, and you could talk about past experiences as well, but what are the advantages and disadvantages for you in working with a writing group?
I would say I'll start with the disadvantages too, and that would definitely be the fact that you have to write. I don't want to have to write. Come on. And we get on a schedule. I'm like, oh man, I have to write more pages. I don't know. It's that whole old quote, writers hate to write. They love to have written.
That is so true.
Yes.
Yeah. and I think, but I will say I have learned so much from working with you guys, with this group. And I think that, we sit and we talk about theory and we talk about dialogue and we talk about concepts and we point things out in each other's works, and you all will read something I wrote and say, well, this is good, but have you thought about this? Or her job is really boring, or it's stuff that I couldn't necessarily come to on my own. I have found, because I do critiques for other authors as well outside of this, and I'm going through my mom's newest book, which should be out relatively soon. Please check her out, Judy Fitzwater. She's on Amazon. I feel like I'm able to give her so much more with this critique than I have before because of all the stuff I've learned from our group. Speaking of my mom, actually, she's written several different IPs, but her successful series is the Dying To series, which started with Dying to get published, and it's about an unpublished author and her writers group. She's been in writers groups forever, my mother has, and I think her first one, they all got published. It's one of those things. It is so important. It's like having a therapist, That is that person's job to sit there and listen to you. You have the writers group. It's their job to sit there and read your stuff and give you feedback and analyze it. I was just recently working through this side project and pitching work, and I knew that I could send this to you guys and get feedback, and it's okay. So I'm like asking the biggest favor because it's a complete circle. It's really hard to get people to read your work. Even if it's published. I mean, I think that people don't realize this. They come out with a book and they think everybody's going to care, and nobody cares. People you don't know care. The people you do know don't care. Prepare yourself for that.
Oh, it's so true. Not everybody's going to buy it. Not everybody, like if you have 2,000 Facebook friends, you're not selling 2,000 copies of your book.
No.
Right. You might sell like 100, right? It's crazy.
Yeah.
But your writers group will all buy that book.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully review it.
Right? Yes. Well, and I think having support. Writing is so mental. Writing a novel is so hard. I mean, the kinds of writing that I do for work is relatively easy because I'm able to directly look at my output versus what my income, and I'm able to respect the boss and the deadlines. If I'm the boss and it's my deadlines, I don't respect myself as a boss very much. And I think that it's, I'm like, I don't really want to write. I'm just going to go play video games for a little while and hang out. But I think that it's one of those things where it's so psychologically hard to believe that you can actually write 80,000 or 100,000 words, and that you can write enough of those words that people would want to read. You need the support of other people saying, no, I really need that next chapter because I'm really dying to know what happens when they get off that train.
Well, and you hit on something earlier that amplifies how I feel about it too, where you're talking about getting access to feedback from people that you trust to more or less be gentle with your words. But you're talking about you get feedback for things in your story that you're too close to, like you live and breathe in this world, and you do know it better than anyone else, but you're still too close to it. And somebody who says the example you gave was, your character has a boring job, right? And I think about the book I'm working on is wrapping up a trilogy. And I knew going into this writing group with you guys that that was going to present a challenge because you haven't read the first 2 books in the series. But what I found is that it really hasn't been that relevant, right? Like there's been obviously a couple points that are referencing things that you're not familiar with, but you guys have helped me make 3 major changes in the book where I actually went back in secret without telling you guys. I went back from the beginning and I rewrote like 3 major story arc changes
Wow.
based on your feedback because these things were so important to me. You know, one of them in particular that I can share because it's not a spoiler was, you know, Miellyn giving me the feedback of like, why is this female character naked, right? Like the sexy demon thing is so played out and dumb, and you know, like it really hit me where, you know, when I'm writing this stuff, I don't think about it. You know, I'm not thinking about how other people are going to receive, you know, this bit of information or, you know, receive this character. And someone to tell you like, and not even just one occasion, right? Like Miellyn didn't say, you know, on one occasion, why is this character naked? There were a couple points where she's like, does this have to be here? Like, does this have to be this way? And I asked myself that same question. I'm like, does it have to be that way? And it was a really simple no. Like, no, of course it doesn't have to be that way. And if Miellyn feels that strongly about it, chances are other people are going to feel that strongly about it. So it needs to be fixed. And that one's a minor change. Like, it's not one of the 3 major ones I went back and did. My whole point being just that this is such valuable feedback to me because without you two, right, like I would put out Noble New World Order with like these glaring holes or naked characters and things that could have been so much better had 2 people, you know, taken the time to read it and say, what if? So that's my takeaway from a writing group, like when I want to talk about advantages.
That's
Aw.
cool. That's very cool.
Thank you.
Now, when it comes to disadvantages, I will say
Schedules.
as much as I love you two, I hate you that you are so good at picking out the things I do wrong. No, no, all kidding aside, it's so humiliating as a writer to have like your flaws exposed, right? I think maybe you guys can relate to that or maybe not.
Yeah.
But it's like
No, we cannot.
I'm
No flaws
flawless.
here.
yeah, like,
Yeah, no
I
flaws here.
never make mistakes. But when somebody points it out in a way that's so obvious to them, and you're just like, oh my God, how did I not see that, right? Like I used the same word 15 times in a chapter. Hilary was kind enough to paste
Oh my God,
into Word
you.
and count for me. So 15
Seriously.
times. But you know, like in a really good way, right? Like I went back and I edited that and I did the exact same thing Hilary did. Like I've got a Word document open, you know, control find, you know, that word.
To be fair, you did that to me first.
No, I'm not picking on you. I'm
No,
saying like,
no. I just think that I think that's really good because
Mhm.
both of us did that, and we
Yep.
both now have like, oh man, I really like the word shown.
Yeah. But that's exactly my point, right? Is that as a reader, you know, you caught that, and obviously Miellyn has busted me on similar things. So it's cool to like, you know, to have that before anyone else sees it, right? Like 2 people have read my book so far, and I'm able to catch these things and fix them before, you know, 10 people read it, or God forbid, 100 people read it. So I really like that, and I like that you both are more or less gentle. I'm going to keep referencing this editor because even though I broke this editor in turn also like really broke my confidence and made me feel like I just wasn't good. And so it's been really cool working with you two to fix that, to help rebuild my shattered confidence. And as a result of working with you two, I know when this damn book is finally done that it is going to absolutely be the best thing it could have been.
Oh, I'm glad to hear that. Well, I think that there has to be a lot of trust. And I
Aw.
think that that's something that we went, you know, we talked a lot about when we started our group, was that you have to trust me to love you and your work. And I have to love you and your work, just like you have to love me and my work. And that's how we're able to give compliments that are true, but also criticism that is honest.
Hilary, I'm going to pose this one to you because I talk at length, so I need to hear somebody else's voice. So, Hilary, can you think of an example working in this writing group or in a previous one where you've had something that's really helped you? Like you really feel like it's helped you develop as a writer because you had, you know, access to a writing group?
there are certain points of the story that I was pretty like dug deep into. Like I was not going to change it, come hell or high water. Nothing was going to change my mind about certain things. And Miellyn actually made me want to revisit.
Wore you down.
I know, made me want to revisit a character interaction that in my mind just was already done. So I can't talk about it at length just because it totally gives away a bunch of stuff.
Sure.
But she made me think about it, made a compelling argument as to why I need to focus more time and energy on this particular character. And it also helps my main character in this conflict that she's having. It actually gives it more weight and I think makes the story a bit more compelling. So yes, I think that when you're writing a story, you can never know how your characters are going to imprint themselves. Ooh, Twilight. Onto somebody who's reading it. It's really cool when someone can advocate for your character to you as the person writing the story. And it's just that's a really cool discussion to have, because I think as a writer, when you're writing a story, you want people to be in that world with you and you want them to love it as much as you do. And so being a part of this group, I think, I'm so entrenched and I love your story. New World Order, David, is amazing. I love Miellyn's character in her story. I'm not going to give away a title, but the werewolf story. I'm so bought into her main person.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean, it's so cool being able to walk among your characters and be a part of that creation process. It's an honor for me. And it's something that I really love when we get to sit down and dive into stories and talk about motivations and of our own work, but also of each other's.
That's one of the things that I really enjoyed talking with you both about was just personalities, right? Like character personalities was a really fascinating discussion. Miellyn's book has so much personality. I mean, so much personality. For those of you who don't have a chance to read this book yet, you're going to want to, because Miellyn's lead character is so awesome. When Miellyn said, in the very beginning, I want you to feel like I'm reading the story to you, I do feel like that. I do feel like this is Miellyn's voice, like coming through loud and clear. And on Hilary's side, what I find fascinating about Hilary's book is that, I mean, I've known Hilary now for, a year and a half, give or take?
A couple years.
A couple years. So like I had no idea this side of you, right? Like I knew the professional side of you, and I knew like the hanging out, being friendly side with you, but I had no idea that like you had this, immense talent as a writer. And so I'm getting to learn so much more about you through this process as well. I talked earlier about, receiving kind of negative criticism and needing thick skin. Like I've never felt that with you two. Like I really enjoy when I see your comments in the margin. Like my favorite part is when you say, well, okay, maybe not my favorite part. I love it when you gush about, something you like, but my second favorite part is when you say, I don't think this character would say that. Like that makes me so happy because I'm like, here's two people that have like invested enough time into my book to know the character well enough to say, no, Dave, you're wrong. Your character wouldn't say that here. Like I love that.
I just like the funny things. So we all make mistakes, and the best part is when we're all laughing about it.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like some of the more awkward scenes, and someone's like, "Yeah, that is so not sexy." Like that stuff is so hilarious to me. Or like when we find the stupid errors, like saying a word a bunch of times in a chapter or throughout your book, whatever. Like those things are so fun because you learn something, you made a mistake, or you need to change something, but it's all wrapped up in this like, yep, we all make mistakes and let's all laugh about it. And that makes it so much easier to digest. So that when we do have to go back, redo it, we're laughing as we do it, as opposed to like crying.
Yeah.
Or being like, I'm such a terrible writer.
No, and it's funny because it sustains too, because I'm going back and I think I've got about 5 chapters left to edit before I can finally get New World Order off to an editor. And as I'm going back through reading the comments that you guys have written, it's funny. It's like, it was funny when you wrote it. And then I've been separated from it for several weeks or a couple of months in some cases. And I go back to it and it's still funny.
Totally. Yeah. It's hilarious. I mean, some of them are just that funny. Or when someone gives you feedback in the form of a question, that's like a sarcastic question. Those are great. Those are fantastic.
So I don't want to put you guys on the spot, and I'll go first to make this easier, I hope. But we've talked about projects that we're working on. So let's talk about completion, right? Because that's like the end goal. Like we've worked. I know. like we've been working hard together for a long time now, and I'm coming up on 2 years since I started writing this book, but I'm happy because Noble New World Order is our second draft is almost done, and then it goes to an editor, and then from there I can publish. So I would say sometime in the next couple months, my book will be available on Amazon.
Yay.
So, Hilary, I'm gonna start with you. I won't say the title of your book, and I'll let you do that. But how's it coming along? Like, what's your game plan for completion?
Yeah. So about that. Yeah, it is done, but it's not done. Like there are some things that I have been receiving some feedback. One of the most important things as a writer, I think, is to get people that you admire. Obviously we have a writers group where we all love and admire each other, but it's also interesting to send your work to those people who maybe you aspire to be like. If you have those relationships built, just other writers who are successful, it's a really, really good idea to have them read your work. And I've been fortunate enough to have some really, really fantastic writers, one of them being Miellyn's mom, which is amazing. Just take a look at my work and say, this thing's really good. This thing's maybe not so good. You might consider revising. So I've gotten a lot of good feedback, which I'm happy about. So now just going to weave those things in. I think for me, the big thing is that I get distracted quite easily. Right now I have a new job. It's pretty important to me. So, yes, that's the reason why this book has not seen the light of day as of yet. Over the past few years, I wrote it originally about 3 or 4 years ago, and it's changed a lot since then. But, if I start a new business venture or open a new company or get a new job that I'm super passionate about, like I am about my current position, those are the things that kind of take me off track. I would hope that sometime within the year, I will get it edited by a professional editor and get it out. So, yes.
Yay.
Stay tuned. More coming on this.
Miellyn, I know that you gave yourself a pretty strict deadline to get your book finished, but
yes.
How's it coming?
So the plan is to get it done by the summer. So it's coming. Like Hilary, I've had a lot of work pop up. I'm a freelancer, and so a lot of my work is piecemeal. And I was just commissioned to write a play in addition to working for some television clients and things. So it's very hard to prioritize your own work when you have paying work that is right there and stuff that you have to do, because writing a novel is so speculative. It's such an investment of your time, and you think about what your time is worth and what's important. I'm definitely motivated, but it's hard. I'm a little stuck, I'll be honest. I want to make sure that I make it, the rest of the book, as good as it can be. I recently did a full rewrite of the first half. I'm really happy with where it is. I feel like the first half is solid, but the second half, I need to figure out what all happens. So I'm still hoping for the summer, but we'll see what happens. It's one of those things, if you can manage to approach it like it is a job, which it is, you can complete things. But I think completion is one of the hardest things that you're going to have with this type of work.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Agreed.
Yeah, and that's actually something that you're really good at, Dave. Is I'm amazed at how much work you have out there. And it's good work. It's not just like, you pooped out a book.
Admirable.
Yeah, it's just, I'm amazed that, when you first started writing Noble and you published it and you have, so many more books out there now. What is it, 5 books in total that you have out?
I have 4 full books and then some compilation stuff.
Yes.
It's incredible.
So that's really good. Like, that's really, really good.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. I wish I was more like that.
One of the things that kind of guided me along the way was just getting some really good tips and feedback from people that were at a level above me, and I'm not just saying skill. I just mean like people that had published, right? Like people that had already got, put collective works out and were kind enough to take a young author under their wing and, kind of help show me the ropes. And all that is what helped me get my books done and out there. So this is actually like a good topic that I wanted to cover with you guys, and I'll go first to give you time to think of an answer. But if you were to be approached today by a young upcoming author that's looking for tips and feedback of how they should approach this process, I'm wondering what you would say to them. And for me, One of the things that nobody told me, it's something that I've really picked up on my own along the way, is that authenticity is so important to a story. And it's up to you as the creator to decide what that level of authenticity is. There are a lot of opinions out there on how you should and shouldn't do certain things in writing. And I think that it's good to know that those opinions are out there, but I wouldn't say that you should ever adhere to a gold standard. And when I say that, I'm referring to an affiliation that I was in called the Independent Author Network. And I'm still a part of it. I just don't really do much with it anymore. One of the topics that had come up right about the time I had just published my second book, The Jumper, one of the writers, who I won't mention because he now actually has become sort of a well-known independent author, so I don't want to run his name down, but he'd had a conversation about how his books at a certain point started getting negative feedback from readers who were offended by some of his word choice, and he felt like he needed to address that, going forward, he needed to clean his books up so that they had no more colorful language and no more things that would offend people, because his ultimate goal was to write books that people wouldn't criticize. And I think that's good. Like, it's good to be aware of that. It's good to be aware of what your readers do and don't want. But at the same time, you have to be true to yourself, and you have to be true to the vision that you came to the table with, because he writes a long series, it's a spy series. I'm not giving anything away. It's like a spy novel series, and the tone has just shifted like so much, right? Like, that wouldn't necessarily happen with James Bond, right? Where, we know James Bond as this character, and then he just slowly becomes something completely different because he's afraid of offending people. When I built the world of Noble, I said, like, authenticity is important to me, even though it's fiction and some of the shit I come up with is not possible. I don't want to shy away from things like that. I don't want to shy away from gruesome violence, because if it's what the scene calls for, it's what the scene calls for. I don't want to shy away from swear words. People swear in real life. This is just reality. I've done it on this podcast. I guess, like, my feedback to somebody who's wanting to become a writer or wanting to publish a book is just make sure at the end of the day you can live with the story that you've written, because people are going to nitpick things to death. People are going to be really pro one way, really con another, but make sure that you are happy with the story you've told. And that's going to be my advice. So, Miellyn, I hope that my long-ass rant gave you some time to think about your answer, but I'm going to start with you.
First of all, I would say write what you want to read. I think that's important. And I also would say you got to figure out, are you making art or are you trying to make it commercial? Because it's two different things.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
If you are bent on selling something and selling it to the largest number of people, then you're going to approach it differently than if you're writing exactly what your heart tells you to do. And it sounds like your friend may have become more successful because he sanitized his work. It's possible that that's true, and that he compromised his artistic vision for his commercial vision, which is valuable and valid. It's one of those things where you can approach this like a business and do this to make money. It's also very, very hard to become successful and rich as an author. I will caution someone against trying to make that be what pays for their rent. But I think that it's important to know what you're doing. And that's another reason why I'm taking my time with my novel, is because it is sort of my art. It'd be great if I were able to sell it and it made me a lot of money and I was the next Stephanie Meyer, and I would be fine with that. Everybody can make fun of me. As long as everybody also paid me and made tons of movies, I'm great with that. But I think that I know that it's what I want to write, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's an extremely valid point. So, Hilary, what about you? Same question.
We talked about it earlier, and I think while I agree with both of you that, like, living by the rules is sometimes prohibiting or limiting of your artistic genius, I do think it's important to understand why those rules are there. So maybe not the hard and fast, like stop using adverbs. You know, if you want to write adverbs in your first draft, if incandescently lights your fire, good for you. But I think understanding why rules are there from a storytelling perspective, I think that's really, really important. So knowing that, you know, you start off with a hook, or knowing things like, I don't know, each character should have a motivation, or looking at the dynamic arcs of different characters as they go and tell the main story arc, like that. If you find out more about that, it just helps you become a better storyteller. And at the end of the day, no matter how pretty your words are, or no matter how awesome your setting is, or your characters are brilliant, you need to tell a good story. Mm-hmm. So understanding those things, you know, maybe the 3-act structure, reading books on plot and structure would really be helpful for you. And then just, you know, networking and fellowshipping with other writers is probably the best piece of advice that I could have for anyone. We've all been writers for years and years, and we finally found a group with the 3 of us that's freaking phenomenal, that it checks all the boxes, and it's awesome. We've all been at other writers groups that we may not feel have been as good, but we did learn something. So definitely working with other writers, talking to other writers, making friends with other writers is the number one piece, and learning the rules. Those 2 pieces of advice are my go-to for advice, if that makes sense.
I know that we are getting short on time, and we've already put in a lot this morning, which I appreciate. I'm so glad to have you both on here. Before we wrap this up, I know Miellyn brought something up really cool before the podcast went on the air about an Amtrak program that she wanted to mention. And before she gets into it, because I'm going to give Miellyn the floor to talk about it, and then we can discuss it. But I thought this was really funny because it ties in exactly to a book I've already published. So, Miellyn, tell us about Amtrak's residency program for writers.
Yeah, so Amtrak is doing this really cool thing. There were a couple of authors who started tweeting about how they thought Amtrak needed to have a residency because trains are the best place to write, which is true. It's absolutely true. I've done it. I've taken a bunch of overnight trains, and I've written chunks of books and games and all sorts of things on there because there's no Wi-Fi, which is huge, and it's quiet and beautiful, and the repetitive noise, the whole thing. It's a wonderful experience. So they tweeted about this, and Amtrak actually tweeted back and said they thought this was a fantastic idea. And now, actually, they are putting it into use. They actually had these 2 authors, or one of the 2 authors, do this already, and now they are taking applications. So it's blog.amtrak.com/Amtrak residency, and they're taking 24 writers for a program from March 17th through March 31st, and it's a round trip sleeper car for you just to go and write.
That's so awesome.
Yeah.
I think that is so cool because in my 20s, I did a lot of traveling by Amtrak, and I guess it was like the lazy man's Jack Kerouac approach. I don't know, like I got to thinking about there's so many parts of the country I've never seen, and I thought, what a cool opportunity to go through like these little towns that no one's, you know, heard of anymore, or, you know, like maybe some of them are big towns or big cities or whatever. Like I just thought it'd be cool to see things. And what I found during this experience was being on a train for long periods of time. You know, you're surrounded by other passengers. Even if you're in a sleeper car, you know, you still come out for your meals, and they have community seating, so you have to be with people. But like you meet so many interesting people, which could be good and bad. But you meet so many interesting people, and what I found in my experience is that maybe it's a version of cabin fever, maybe it's just the need for human interaction, but it kind of felt like being a bartender, right? Where people will just start telling you such intimate details about their life or their journey or whatnot, or I don't even know. I mean, I've experienced so much, I don't even know where to begin, but I would always come back with these stories of just like these bizarre, stranger than fiction kind of tales, and like they became like cocktail party fodder, right? Where like people would be like, "Oh, there's Dave. Dave, come over. Tell us about that guy in Los Angeles or whatever." And people would always tell me like, "Oh my God, you've got to like put these stories in a book." And so I did. I wrote a book called Strangers, which is a collection of stories. that are based on true events that really happened to me while traveling. And to a point that we talked about way back at the beginning of the podcast, that Hilary was mentioning about in writing in journals, I kind of embellished them a bit to make them more, more interesting to read. Like I maybe threw a different ending on them, or maybe like added a few details that I wouldn't have been in the room to experience. But they're all based on real things that I encountered. And so much, in fact, like I've got so many stories that once I wrap up NWO, I'll actually write Strangers too, just to like keep it going. But I wanted to tell a little bit darker version of these stories because, like I said, you hear some really messed up stuff from people when you're traveling. I don't know that Amtrak would want me necessarily as part of their program, but it was a really fun experience. So Hilary, what would you think of doing something like that? Like, would you like have fun? Do you think, like doing big long distance train travel and being able to write with silence?
Yeah, I mean, the only trains that I've really been on are to and from San Francisco. We have Caltrain here in the Bay Area. And then when I go to Europe, train travel is huge, for that. So I would love to do something like see more of the US of A in a train and just get that time to just sit and devote and not and like Miellyn said, no Wi-Fi, no pressure on you to multitask and do all of the things that you normally do when you're at work, at home, whatever. I would love to do that. And I would actually like to say that it would be amazing if next year we could like do a writer's retreat. I'm just saying.
Awesome.
Can we do that?
On a train?
Even
on
better.
A train or like rent a lake house or I don't know.
Yeah,
Just
that would be great.
Do like a writer's thing. Like I would love to. I feel like we all have so many things going on in our lives that it would be so cool to just carve out some time and really devote it to getting that, interaction with each other and then writing and going off and doing our thing and then like coming back and compare notes. We should do this. I'm officially making myself the organizer.
Yes, I'm in. I mean, when I was trying to finish my game, we went to the mountains in West Virginia and rented a cabin, and my husband would go off and hike with the dog and cook dinner, and I would just sit and write and look out the window at the mountains. And I got a big chunk of the last of that game done by doing that because I was able to go and just focus. It's hard to be at home. It's hard to sit around and think, well, I have laundry to do and
Yep, definitely.
Chores and all these other things you should be doing and it's very hard to find a good space to write. So I'm definitely in.
I like it. I would enjoy that. And I'll try to write something not as dark as what Amtrak inspired.
It'll be interesting to see where we are next in terms of our writing. Hopefully all of our work is out and being appreciated by others and moving on to the next projects.
I'm excited that I don't have to write Noble 4. As much as I have loved the experience, it's like a trilogy is a trilogy and it's time to move on. But
that's fantastic.
I'm really excited to see what comes next. And
Me too.
My idea box is overflowing with random crap that you will all see soon.
Yay.
Well, and by you all, I mean you too.
Nobody else gets to see it.
And I'm excited to see the second half of Miellyn's book this year.
Yes,
before the summertime, Miellyn. Before the summertime.
I would love it if somebody would show me the second half of this book. That would be fabulous. If I could have like the book fairy come and deliver it to me under my pillow, I would be so happy.
Well, you know what? I think one of the best things, and maybe we've already mentioned it, but one of the best things about this group, and I feel like anyone listening, I feel really sorry for you that you're not in this group. But one of the best things I can say is when you do find the writers group that you want to be a part of and you have great relationships with the people that you're working with, one of the best things to do is just to brainstorm. And I love it when we all can sit down and go, what do you think? Like, what would be a cool thing to happen here? Or, trying to just bounce ideas around. I think that part of the creative process with other people that you trust and admire, that's one of the most fun things that you can do. Mm-hmm. So, yeah. I love brainstorming with you guys. Aww.
Me too. Aww.
I love being able to just come up with like a random idea and say, all right, you guys, what do you think? Actually, it was because of you two that the back text of my book was completed. Like that all came from you guys. I mean, I wrote it, but you helped me, make it actually sound like a professional thing people would pick up and read. So thank you.
I'm glad.
See, this is like a all service writing group here.
Yeah, it's true.
We got your writing and your marketing all taken care of.
Right.
Exactly. Which will come next. Like we'll cover that on a future podcast. Like
Yeah.
once these damn things are finished, what do we do? I would like to thank Hilary, Heskett, Shapiro, Miellyn, Fitzwater, Barrows for coming on the Hulegaard Books podcast and chatting about books and writing groups and Gone with the Wind, which won't be on the podcast, but trust me, it's hilarious. Thank you both so much for your time, and I hope that we can do this again.
Thanks for having us.